When we feel like we're too much, it can feel really debilitating, and it prevents all sorts of experiences that we may want to have with the people in our lives and certain opportunities, right? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why we feel too much. Let's talk about what we can do when we do feel too much so that we can get out of our own way and go after the things that we want. Hello, hello, beautiful humans. I'm Thaís Sky. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here. And we are in worthiness season, which means that I am spending more time on social media and here on the podcast talking about the worthiness wound, talking about how we can think about the worthiness wound so that we can heal it, tend to it, understand it, hold it, and certainly kind of hold it in a way that allows us to feel a little bit more free. Now, because we are in worthiness season, I love to give free things. Not only free content on my Instagram, which you can find me at I am Thaís Sky. You can also go to the show notes. But I decided to bring back a 5-day journey, so to speak, that I created 2 years ago. It's been collecting dust in the archives. I wanted at one point to put it on my website, but I never got around to it. And so I was looking at the content and I was like, oh, this stuff is so good. I want to bring it back out into the world. So I created a 5 days of worth reset experience where for 5 days you'll receive an email from me every morning with some thoughts on worth, ideas, tools, practices, reflections, but mostly an opportunity for us to get in touch with the worth that already exists within us. This reset experience is less about giving you more to do or more to think about, though I do that, admittedly, but really it's the ways in which we can come back to what is already within us, because I believe we are all worthy. We are all able to access the worth that already exists in us. We can't, energy cannot be created or destroyed. I like to think about that in terms of the spiritual way, and that means I like to think about it too in terms of an emotional way. We can't just create worth out of nowhere. We already have it. All of us already have it within us. We are born worthy. We just maybe have lost our ability to get in touch with it. And so this 5 days of worth is that opportunity where I will be coming to you with reminders for your worth and things that we can do to help us touch base with the ways in which we are already enough. We are doing enough. We are being enough for everything that we may want in our lives. So you can go to thaissky.com/5. That's FIVE/5 for 5 days of worth. I will also be putting this in the show notes. I'm really, really excited about it. Again, it is free, and I have some treats in store for you around this reset experience that I cannot wait to share with you. We already have people signing up. It's going to be a really cool opportunity to do something together, and I can't wait to have you be a part of it. Again, go to thaissky.com/5, FIVE. And if you know of anyone that you think you would want to do this 5-day reset experience with, well, make sure to send them that link as well. Invite your friends, invite your colleagues, invite anyone that you want to kind of go through this journey with together. Because when we hold each other accountable, something really magical also happens, right? We can go into work and be like, hey, Danielle, did you do this today, right? And you can talk about it and reflect on it together. And there's something really fun about doing these things together. Yes? Okay, so thaissky.com/5. Now, worthiness season comes to you in part by Worthy Women Rise, my signature group program for sensitive, smart, soulful women who want to learn how to get out of their own way by tending to the worthiness wound. Worthy Women Rise is a year-long program that I curate and thoughtfully have created to support you in really understanding yourself in a different way than maybe you have ever understood yourself before. Not only so you can cultivate deeper insights and awareness about yourself, but so that you can actually experience a healing, a transformation, a different way of relating to yourself in the world, so that you can take up greater space in the world, so that you can become the woman that you want to be, so that you can feel more free. Worthy Women Rise is a really special container because it is really the area that I bring all of my knowledge and insights to on how to create meaningful, lasting change. So you can learn more about Worthy Women Rise at worthywomenrise.com. Like I said, doors are now open, and I'm really, really excited for this 11th cohort of this program. This is not my first rodeo. It's not even my 8th or 9th rodeo. This program has been around. It has, I received so much feedback and ways to make it continually better and better to support you take up the space that you want to take up and get out of your own way in whatever way that looks like. Okay, so you can learn more at worthywomenrise.com. And part of what we're going to talk about in this podcast, in this episode, really is directly connected to Worthy Women Rise, because when we learn how to relate to ourselves and our too muchness differently, we learn how to relate to so many other aspects of our lives differently. So let's get into this conversation of too muchness. Now, the idea of like feeling too much, is like a felt sense, right? We have a general understanding of what it feels like when we feel like we are too much, but it's hard to articulate exactly what feels too much, right? It feels difficult to really name, like, what really is it when we feel like we are too much? Typically, how that looks like in our relationships is that we feel like we have a lot of needs, we have a lot of internal experiences, we have a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings. We have a lot that we're holding, and when we bring it to somebody, they essentially reject us. They essentially say, I cannot hold all that you want me to hold. Too muchness then comes up for us because we suddenly feel like we're alone in all of this stuff, right? In all of our experiences, in all of our feelings, in all of our needs. Needs is a really great way to think about too muchness, because it really tends to come out in the ways in which we need certain things, and we kind of vulnerably, for many of us, we vulnerably ask another person to meet our need in some way, and they essentially tell us, no, we can't do that. I can't meet that need. I can't do that for you. And now suddenly we're left with this immense sense of not only the rejection, but also in the ways in which we really needed something and somebody in some way, and that is not getting fulfilled. And so that tends to result in a sense of, I am too much for this person. And I want us to kind of think about too muchness in a particular lens that can help us then know how to tend to our too muchness. Because when we know how we can tend to it, we can relate to it differently, and we can invite other people in our lives to relate to it a little bit differently. So if we define too muchness as a way in which we feel that somebody else cannot take on what we're asking them to take on, then inherently in the feeling of too muchness is another. We typically don't feel like we are too much in isolation. If we are feeling too much in isolation, like there are times, right, late at night when we're spiraling, we're overwhelmed, we're freaking out, and we feel like, my God, I am too much. My feelings are too much. Generally, that experience, even though we are experiencing it in isolation, is a reflection of how other people have related to our feelings in the past, because how we relate to ourselves is a reflection of how other people have related to us. We don't relate to ourselves in isolation. How we are, how we relate to ourselves, how we understand ourselves is born out of relationships. Everything is relational. And so if we think about it in that way, anytime we are in touch with this sense of feeling too much, what we're generally sensing into is a relational awareness. We're sensing into a relational dynamic with this other person. The too muchness is born out of a relationship. So too muchness is relational. And this alone can help us immensely redefine our relationship with too muchness. Because now, if we think about it as relational data, rather than it just being something defective in us or something defective in another, then we can create some space for exploration with the other person. But if we go too quickly into too muchness means that I am too much, right? I am literally too much. There's something wrong with me. I am too much. Or if this sense of too muchness connects to the other person is not enough, the other person is less than, then we tend to jump to conclusions about what that means. It means that we're broken, defective, there's something wrong, or it means that the other person is broken, defective, and that there's something wrong with the other person, which then can sometimes lead to us rejecting them, us pulling away from them. And I'm not saying that that's not always the answer. Sometimes that is the answer. But if we start to think about too muchness as a relational dynamic, then we have a whole other set of kind of skills and ideas and tools that we can pull out of for how to tend to our too muchness. As opposed to if we think about it in an isolated way, if we think about too muchness as a defectiveness in the other or ourselves, then we're now very limited to how we can relate to it, right? If it means that we're broken, then how do we navigate that? How do we hold ourselves when we think that we're too broken? Certainly, we can try to reparent ourselves, which is something that I teach more extensively in Worthy Women Rise. But that doesn't really kind of help us in the long term figure out how to relate to our feelings totally differently. And if we're relating to other people as broken, or that we now need to reject them because they think that we're too much, then we may end up finding ourselves alone. And that's really not the point, right? We don't want to kind of develop ourselves to such a point that there's no one in our lives. What drives a lot of meaning in our lives are relationships. So we have to find a way to navigate these feelings. We can't just push them away. We can't just deny them. We can't just settle into, oh, I'm broken, and that's what that means. When in fact, too muchness is so rich. There's so much worthy exploration to be had in our feelings of too muchness. And that's something that we do a lot in Worthy Women Rise, right? Is to really slow down and think about these internal experiences with a little bit more compassion and understanding and curiosity, instead of just collapsing into like, now I have to do something. I have to push these feelings away. We often do that though. We often try to push away by making conclusions about ourselves or the other person because these feelings are intolerable. So while I can really empathize and understand why we tend to jump to conclusions, there is something that we really miss when we push too fast, when we go too hurriedly into conclusions. Too muchness being one of the many ways that we may find that we do that with ourselves. Now, I wrote an Instagram post a little while ago about one idea, one way that maybe that we can think about too muchness, and how it kind of stems out of a relationship. And it ties with this idea of mirroring. So I'm going to read the post and then I'm going to explain it a little bit more. So today I want to talk about mirroring and a possible reason for why some of us feel like we are too much. When we're little, one of the most important things our parents can do for us is to mirror our emotions. That looks exactly how it sounds. If the child is angry, then the parent mirrors that anger by reflecting what the child is saying similarly to how the child is saying it. Okay, so let's break that down right there. If a child is throwing a tantrum, for example, the child may not have language to express what they're feeling. They're little, they're still learning. If a parent goes up to them and says, "You're angry. Yeah, you're angry. This isn't fair. It's not fair," right? And they even maybe match the tone, or I kind of slammed my fist into my into my knee, right? Like really kind of bodily express it, and say, "Yeah, you're angry." Right? Now, what are we doing there? We're mirroring something to the child. The child is now looking at the adult and seeing something of their experience in the adult. There's so many reasons for why this is critical to developmental psychology, to our development. One, when the child sees something outside of themselves in another, then suddenly that thing is contained. If that other person can feel angry like me, but they're surviving it, they're able to digest it, they're able to tolerate it and give it back to me in a little bit more of a digestible way, right? By telling me I'm angry in a way that's very empathic and kind, then we start to learn, oh, maybe I don't have to push these feelings away. Not one, this is what I'm feeling. Two, look, this other person can tolerate it. Maybe I can tolerate it. And oh, these feelings have a place, right? These feelings are communicating something. The way I'm experiencing inside, there's language for that. All of that is so critical to our development. Okay. I'm going back to the reading. This can look like saying in a similar fashion to the child. Oh, I skipped a little bit ahead here. Okay, so the post goes, "You are very angry at mommy right now. Did I get that right?" When the caregiver does this, the child learns a few things. They learn to get curious about their emotions, they learn self-awareness, and most importantly, they learn that their emotions are safe to feel because the caregiver can contain it. Having our emotions reflected teaches us that the world can hold our emotions and therefore we can hold our emotions. Notice, by the way, that this is relational. Emotions are relational, and how we learn to navigate our emotions stems out of how our caregivers modeled to us their relationship with their emotions, but also how they related to our emotions. So if we do not receive this type of parenting, if the caregiver shuts down the child or punishes the child when they feel something is unacceptable, like, you're not allowed to feel that way, right? Like, you're not allowed to be angry with me. Like, of course you can't put your hand in the oven. That's stupid. You shouldn't have any feelings about it, right? If they communicate in any of that way, the child often begins to learn that their feelings push away the people they need to survive. Our emotions, therefore, have no place to go. We are alone in them. And as children, this often is too overwhelming. So as a way of coping, we internalize the message that we are too much and emotions are not safe. This is, for some of us, the beginning of the worthiness wound and a sense of deep inadequacy. There is something wrong with me. Now, as adults, our opportunity is to reparent our inner child and to develop the capacity to be with our emotions. Just because you feel like you are too much does not mean that you are. So in this post, this is one kind of, again, one way in which maybe we can think about our too muchness, that we may feel like we are too much because we have traditionally been placed in environments where the containers for our emotions were too small. If our parents couldn't hold our emotions, they were reflecting to us that our emotions were too big for them. And so if our emotions are too big for the people in our lives, then they are too big. And so if we continually find ourselves in small containers, then we will continually to find ourselves feeling like our emotions are too much. And so this sets up a cycle where we feel like our emotions are too much. We really have now a relational dynamic where we kind of find ourselves in relationships with other people who tend to find our emotions to be too much because their emotional lives are very small, or because they've all been taught, right, that their emotions are too much. And now we're seeing it reflected in all sorts of relationships. Again, the conclusion is our emotions are too much. Our internal experience are too much for people. And so is it that we are actually too much? Or is it that we have been accustomed to feeling too much and continually find ourselves in containers that are too small? So now that internal small container is inside of us, and we have low capacity to be with our feelings. Not only are other people containers too small, but our containers are too small as well. Our internal ability to be with our feelings are too rigid, too small. And so we find ourselves feeling too much as a chronic state of being. Worthy Women Rise is really created to directly support this exploration because the container is not too small. I've cultivated it very intentionally to make it fit our emotional lives. And so then the fault is no longer in the exterior container. It's now an opportunity for us to recalibrate our internal capacity and container. So that's kind of one way to think about our too muchness as a reflection of a historic relating that was too small. And so we have to then think about, if we are feeling too much right now as an adult in this moment, to really think about, what is it that I'm actually feeling? Am I feeling like there's no space for my anger, that the other person is shutting down my feelings? Or am I interpreting their behavior as a reflection of them shutting down my internal experience? Is it what's actually happening, or is that how I'm interpreting their behavior because that's what I'm accustomed to? I call my partner and tell my partner I'm really upset. And my partner says, I'm in the middle of work. I can't help you right now, but I'll be home in an hour and I'll support you then. I take his rejection to mean I am too much. Of course I am. No one can ever hold my upsetness. Everybody tells me that they can't hold my upsetness. Here's a clear example of how my upsetness is too much for people. And so I take his whole thing as a rejection, and it feeds into I'm too much and people suck. You're right, like my partner sucks, like people can't hold my too muchness. But that's not what he said, right? In this example, what he said is right now is not appropriate. I can't give you what you need. I want to be fully present with you, and I can't do that for you right now. Can you give me an hour? But because I'm so used to interpreting people's comments as a rejection, I'm going to then push away. And now he comes home and I'm now very upset with him. And I'm like, you think I'm too much for you, and we get into a fight. If we slow it down, what's happening there is we're interpreting something based on previous experience that may not actually be what's happening, and then we're reacting from that place. So what we want to do is we really want to slow that down and really tap into what's happening inside of us. Sometimes this can be really hard to do alone. We don't know what we don't know. And getting support is a really great way that we can slow that down and really understand, wait, did he actually reject me? Or was he really trying to tell me that he wanted to be even more present for me and he couldn't be in that moment? And how interesting it is that I called him at work, knowing that he was probably going to say, right? Like unconsciously, I may not even been consciously aware of it. I may just have been aware that I'm upset and I wanted to call him, but maybe unconsciously, I wanted him to reject me by reaching out to him at work instead of waiting the hour for him to come back. So there could be a lot of layers to this. There could be a lot of ways in which we participate in the perpetual sense that we are too much, because that's what we have somehow accustomed to. That's the relational roadmap that we're working with. Okay, sometimes it may be that we actually are too much. One way to interpret that example is that my partner was saying, this is too much for me right now. I can't do this with you right now. This is too much for me right now. And I'm willing to give it to you later, but I can't give it to you right now. And so then there's a level of accountability that's really also required in the healing of our too muchness, of the ways in which we may actually be trying to put our muchness, our feelings, our internal experiences onto people in inappropriate ways. Because in some ways we kind of hope that they will validate our too muchness. So it's not just that I feel too much because the other person is wrong in making me feel too much. There's more to the story, and this can be hard for some of us to hear when we're so accustomed to pointing the arrows outward, right? I am perpetually too much for people because other people are too small. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes we do a disservice by either seeking out people whose containers are too small or somehow orchestrating the event in ways in which even the people who have the right size container aren't available in the moment that we want them. So in this way, again, if we think about too muchness as a relational dynamic, sometimes you may actually be the one that is being too much. But if we quickly collapse into the worthiness wound, if we quickly collapse into I'm bad, I'm broken for being too much, other people are bad and broken for making me feel like I'm too much, if we kind of collapse internally, then what happens is we prevent all forms of exploration about what may be happening relationally because we're just too overwhelmed with our own nervous system. And so then we want to do some healing, some reparenting, some recalibration, some conversations with, healing spaces to kind of work through what goes on in those moments when things really collapse. Because while we collapse in our too muchness, we really then don't have the flexibility to think about when we can, lean on people and when it may not be appropriate. Right. And so now that accountability, right, or that kind of responsibility, self-responsibility, or that kind of thoughtfulness about like, okay, I'm feeling a whole lot and I really want support. Who can I reach out to that may be able to give it to me right now? Or how can I hold this in my mind for an hour until my partner comes home, etc. If I'm too collapsed in my inadequacy, then I prevent that type of kind of higher functioning, higher level thinking of really wondering what may be happening here. And then we can't take any type of responsibility, or we can't actually put the responsibility firmly if it lies within the other, because we are so collapsed. So we want to heal the worthiness wound so that we can see the data of our lives more clearly. Because while there's a wound that continually churns in the back of our minds, perpetually telling us we are broken, and any feedback that we get in the world directly feeds into that and collapses us, then we're missing out on a whole slew of data and possibility and options. And this is where so many of us feel utterly stuck. If we continually find ourselves stuck in these similar dynamics, it's probably because something is collapsing, something needs tending to, so we can see things a little bit more clearly. Okay. So if we think about too muchness back into this idea of a relational dynamic, okay, so if we are feeling too much, let's say that the example now is that our partner is sitting in front of us. They are totally present with us, and we are feeling too much. What if we were to be able to say, hey, I'm feeling like my emotions are too much for you right now, right? Like I'm interpreting some of what you're saying as it meaning that you're rejecting me, that you're pushing me away, that I am too much for you. When we do that, when we're able to stay regulated, stay within ourselves, and communicate that to our partner, oh my gosh, now that opens a whole range of possibilities, because now our partner or the other person can say, oh, yeah, maybe this is all too much for me right now. I haven't slept well and I'm really struggling with my own stuff. Like, yeah, maybe this is feeling too much for me, and I just didn't have words to communicate it until you expressed this to me. How can maybe we think about you calling your, somebody else, or you going get support somewhere else, or why don't we pause this and talk more about this when I'm feeling a little bit more sustained, or let's eat dinner first and then talk about this. Right now we're in a solution. Now we're in relating. Now we're in something together. My feelings of too muchness conveyed something that now the two of us can hold together and think about together, as opposed to in that moment me feeling too much and then not knowing what to do about it, collapsing, rejecting, withholding, punishing the partner, pulling away, saying, you know what, you're not good enough for me. Your way of holding me is telling me that I'm too much for you. I need to leave, or we need to break up, etc., etc. When we can think about too muchness as a relational dynamic and as something that we can talk about together, then we can start to understand ourselves better, and we can start to understand our partner better. Another possibility is I say, yeah, I'm feeling too much. I'm feeling way too much. I'm feeling like you're rejecting me. And then the partner says, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think that at all. What about what I said made you feel that way? Oh, well, when you said, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you started giving me advice, it made me feel like you want to just put this under, you want to push this away. Oh, I didn't know that advice stirred that up for you. Okay, well, now I know, now I can do differently next time. That's really important for me to have known that. Thanks for letting me know. And then I'm like, yeah, I guess I didn't really realize it either, how much advice giving kind of makes me feel like I shouldn't have the feelings that I have. Look at that. Another beautiful example of healthy relating, right? Of two people trying to figure things out together, trying to understand this stuff together. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, wait, people have these types of conversations? Yes, they do, my friend. They certainly do. And not only do people have these conversations, this is what is ideal. This is what we kind of are working for. This is why we heal. This is why we do the work. This is why I created Worthy Women Rise. So we can not only learn the skills to help us regulate in these very tender moments, but so that we can actually also have the bravery to have these really tender moments. Because it is this type of relating that allows us to create intimacy, that allows us to create connection with each other, that allows us to create something more meaningful in our lives. But while we're continuing to run unconsciously the worthiness wound or people-pleasing, perfectionistic tendencies, we know what the other person is doing, we're mind reading and assuming, and then we're jumping to conclusions and reacting while our lives feel like a perpetual sense of reactivity, then we're really missing an opportunity to do some deeper intimacy. If we're reacting, we're not open to different possibilities. Yes? Okay. So sometimes in that conversation, I say, I'm feeling too much. The other person may say, this is too much. Now we have some options. If they continually say this to us, if I'm like, hey, I consistently feel like you don't ever give space for my feelings. You continually reject or shut them down. This is what I see you do. And we're in continual conversation about it. And the other person continues to say, yeah, I can't tolerate these feelings. Yeah, this is not enough. This is not good. I can't do this. Then what they're telling you is that they're not the right person for you. Or more specifically, they're not the right person to go with these specific needs. Then maybe this idea of if I am too much for you and you need to go find less, right? This kind of classic internet phrasing that people love. If you think I'm too much, go find less. Oh, I love it. So empowering. Yes. But it's not the first step in a relationship. The first step in a relationship is not to go to that place. There's some steps that we need to take before we go to the place where we start to really grapple with, yeah, maybe this is not the right relationship for me. Or maybe if we're talking about friendships, I need to recalibrate how much I anticipate being able to go to this person with my needs, right? If they are continually showing you and you're in conversation about it, you're not just assuming, but you're talking about it and they're continually shutting you down, then yeah, maybe that person is not right for you. Maybe they are too little for you. And that's not a bad thing. That doesn't make them wrong or broken. Again, when we collapse into worthiness wound, everything is broken. Either they're broken or we're broken. When we heal the worthiness wound or tend to the healing or recalibrate our relationship with it, and we don't go there so quickly, then we can think about it of like, yeah, maybe this person just isn't the right person for me right now. Maybe this type of friendship isn't the right type of friendship for me right now. Let's say you and your, best friend have a way of relating to each other, have a way of sharing things with each other. You are very kind of supportive with each other. And then one day, someone very close to her dies. And now she's like gripped in a whole roller coaster of grief and pain and loss and ending. And she's just really overwhelmed. She may not be the right person for you to lean on in the ways that you've leaned on her just the day before. There's something new here. She's totally in a new experience of recalibrating her own relationship with her capacity. And there must be some type of flexibility here, or else you're going to continue to lean on her or continue to kind of reach out to her, and she's going to start rejecting you because she's not capable of it. And if the relationship isn't flexible enough to adapt, then the relationship may not survive. And that can be really difficult to grapple with, particularly for her. She already lost someone close, and now she's having to grapple losing you simply because there was a lack of adjustment, right? So we want to be really thoughtful about who we're reaching out to for support. Who are we leaning on? Who are we wanting to fulfill our needs? Certain relationships may not be the relationships that you need for your needs. Alternatively, there may be certain relationships where how they lean on you is different than how you lean on them. Not every relationship has to be 50-50 for it to be supportive, congruent, kind of useful in your life. There may be some relationships where it's 75-25, where they lean on you more. And there's other relationships where you're 75-25 and you lean on them more. Now, if you're finding a pervasive pattern in your life where people lean on you more than you lean on them, that's worthy of exploration, right? That may be a sign that there's some people-pleasing, worthiness, woundy things going on. But generally speaking, we want to be kind of thoughtful about how we are seeing relationships. Part of the worthiness wound is that we really see relationships as very transactional. But that's for another conversation, for another day, maybe another podcast episode. Okay, so let me think about what else I want to make sure to talk about our feelings of too muchness. We talked about how it may be an internal state, right? Given deeper relational patterns that may not match what's actually happening. It may match what is happening, in which case there's an opportunity for us to talk about and explore. There's also, thinking about who we go to for our needs. I will also say, though, that when I personally have found the right containers for my own healing, now too muchness is something that I've struggled with. I've been very open about the ways in which I've struggled with the worthiness wound. This is why I've become a teacher of it, because of my own personal experiences with it and wanting to find healing. I find that when I have enough spaces for my own tending, as opposed to feeling like I have to do all of my tending alone, when I have enough spaces with people who continually show me their capacity to hold my feelings, I feel less inclined to feel like I am too much. It's a remarkable thing, because I insisted for a long time, most of my life, especially in my teens and my 30s, my 20s, I went from relationship to relationship feeling like I am too much for people. My emotional life is more chaotic, more overwhelming than most people. Now, I identify as a sensitive person, and not everybody identifies as a sensitive person. So here I was having all sorts of feelings all the time about things and feeling really alone in them because nobody else was having this type of internal experience. And so then I found myself in all of these relationships where I continually felt like I was the wild, chaotic one. When I started to do my own healing work, when I started therapy, when I started participating in coaching programs, something like Worthy Women Rise, which is why I created it as a container for exactly this type of internal experience. But when I found my own healing and started to find relationships, people to support me that didn't find me too much, but actually helped me make sense of mirror, one of them, but attunement, curiosity, and started to model to me a different way of relating to my emotional experience. And they didn't show me in any way, shape, or form that I was too much. It's amazing what started to feel a little bit more settling within me. And then, because of that, I started finding relationships with people who didn't find me too much, and who were able to hold me in ways that I felt before wasn't able to be held. This is what's possible for all of us. I believe that healing is possible for all of us who want it. If we want it, it's possible. Not all of us want it. That's okay. For those of us who want it, who want to feel a little bit more contained, want to feel a little bit more like we know what's going on inside, feeling like not necessarily in control, but certainly have greater insight and awareness of what's happening. If we want that, it's possible for us. We just now have to find spaces that's going to be conducive to helping us get there. And what's possible for all of us who want it is that we start to find that our container, our thing that was way too small because of the relationships that we grew up in, become a little bit more bigger. And so we start to be able to tend to ourselves in a little bit more compassionate, kind, congruent way, right? Reparenting. We start to be able to do to ourselves what maybe people weren't able to do for us. But it starts by being modeled at by other people. We can't just conjure up in our minds a totally different way of relating to ourselves. We have to have role models. We have to have relationships that teach us that. This is what I do in Worthy Women Rise. This is what I do in my one-on-one work. But also, there's so many ways in which we can find supportive relationships that hold us in ways that we start to feel like, oh, we're actually not too much. Yeah? Because there's nothing wrong with being sensitive. And in fact, it's the best thing about us. Our emotions are our superpower. Our emotions are informing us of how we are understanding ourselves and the world. It's giving us information about the relationships. What it means to be sensitive means that we're in touch with an internal landscape that is dynamic and full of highs and lows and joys and turbulence and all like our inner landscape to me feels like a whole universe. Like when we are lying on the sand at night and we're looking up at the sky and we're hearing the ocean crash and we're seeing all these beautiful stars above us and we feel so small and also like we're part of something so vast and beautiful. Like that's us. We are part of that. Well, that is our internal state too. There's so much that goes on inside of us. And the more that we know it, the more that we can bring awareness to it and name it and digest it and explore it, we create this kind of infrastructure that supports us in ways that allows us to create more intimacy and meaning and purpose in our lives. That's what I mean by getting out of our own way. It's not that I'm very tender about this idea of self-sabotage, because I think it really scares us into thinking that we are our own worst enemy. But I do also resonate with this idea that sometimes it is the things inside of us that are most misunderstood that often stands in the way of what we most want. And so as we develop more understanding and we start to have different experiences and different emotional experiences, things change. And it can be a really beautiful, dynamic thing. So I hope that this gives you a little bit more language about your too muchness, because ultimately our emotions are one of the best things about us. And particularly for us women who have been told in our patriarchal culture that the answer is to be logical and to put more emphasis on the mind and not the heart. Let me tell you, it is when these two systems, when our mind and heart can work together, that we can create really the most magic in our lives. That's what I want for us women. I want us to be able to have a congruency between heart and mind, where they can work together. There's strengths in the mind, there's strengths in the heart, and together we are the soul of the world, right? Like us humans, we are a part of something so much greater than us, but also we are pretty great. And I think especially right now in the landscape of the world, we can be really in touch with the ways in which we suck, right? And the ways in which we're doing a lot of damage to each other and our planet. But I think our hope also lies in each other. And we have to learn how to depend on each other and how to support one another and how to hold each other. And the best ways that we know how we can hold other people is to learn how to hold ourselves. And if you want the type of relationships that I gave examples of, the types of relationships that can hold our muchness, and that can also be honest when they can't, relationships that are dynamic, that are able to match kind of emotional intelligence and communication. If you want those relationships, well, they're possible, but we have to be willing to go first. We have to be willing to show how it's done. We have to start doing that work. We can't anticipate other people changing in order for then us to find permission to change. We have to go first. Okay? We need each other. We need each other now more than ever. And we need worthy women to rise. Yes? All right, beautiful humans. I'll be back with you next week for another episode of Reclaim. Doors are open for Worthy Women Rise. Go to worthywomenrise.com to learn more. And I am so excited to see you next week.